Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for the Superintendent's Report. I'm Carol Birdsong, and joining me for our discussion is Williamson County Schools Superintendent Jason Golden. And we are going to basically do a recap of last night's school board meeting, or I should say the April school board meeting that just happened last night as we tape this on a Tuesday. So we have lots to talk about.
We do, and of course we've done this for the past few years, having a discussion after the board meeting to give a synopsis. We shoot for about 30 minutes or so.
We do. Sometimes we go over. So that just usually we have more to talk about than we have time for. But so I'm going to dive right in. We had some fun awards, kind of I don't know, different awards than normal. Future Farmers of America. We did some awards last night for Page High School and Fairview High School. So shout out to them. And you know, they still do Drive Your Tractor to Work Day.
It was neat to see those awards. You know, the Future Farmers of America awards are actually in Gatlinburg, and for those of us who know Tennessee, we recognize the background of a lot of the award photos, that the students had left the convention center at Gatlinburg and stood in front of the convention center for the photos. There was one of a wood carving of a bear, those kinds of neat things that you see in the Gatlinburg area. Our Future Farmers Club from Page did a great job. They do a great job every year, and it's nice to see the recognition that they get.
That's right. And Fairview got the Superior Chapter Award, so congrats to them. Also, of course, one of my favorites is the National Speech and Debate Association, those forensics students, and Brentwood has several going to the national competition. And then robotics. Our Brentwood middle school students are really put on a show at robotics, so they get to go to the world competition.
We have a number of robotics programs in our schools from elementary to middle to high. The hands-on practical approach of the robotics programs really just gives that extra opportunity for students to do some really neat things that ultimately are going to teach the love for technology that might lead to a career. And if it doesn't directly lead to a career, it opens doors for students as they grow.
That's right. Well, congrats to all of our students and teachers and coaches and such.
And Carol, I want to mention one more thing. We mentioned FFA. FFA also focuses on parliamentary procedure. That's one of the aspects of the FFA program. The completeness of some of the programs that our teachers sponsor and work hard on with students in an extracurricular aspect is a lot more than a lot of people realize.
And I'll just put a tease out there. Next month when we do this show, we have a lot of students in Career and Tech that through HOSA and DECA and other groups that we'll be honoring. So stay tuned for that. All right, it's testing time in Williamson County Schools across the state. We have 5.5 weeks basically left of school, this school year, which I cannot believe. But we've opened up the testing window, if you will. And so elementary students have started, end of course assessments are underway.
Well, that's right. We have TCAP, which is the Tennessee Standardized Test System, and it's for grades 3 through 8. And then we have end of course testing.
In certain classes.
In our high school classes. The state has particular tests that they have for particular courses, but of course we have final exams as well. We're not quite at the final exam stage as we sit here in April, but the TCAP process has started. I will say also, in addition to that TCAP structure that starts in 3rd grade, we do screeners for our youngest students to evaluate where they are on their capacity to receive that grade level instruction. At the youngest grades, we happen to use a product called Ames Web. So our students are also being screened to review where they are this school year to ensure that we are teaching the standards and that the students are mastering those standards as they prepare to move up to the next grade.
And that's great information for teachers to have, so they know how to move that student along. It's great information for families to have as well, so they know what progress their child's made.
Over the years, we have learned that if we are going to continue to grow our students, it takes teacher collaboration, it takes planning between the teachers. We're a high-performing school district. The families who watch this, the families who've chosen to be here know that. For us to continue to grow and advance, it takes that detailed work between teachers, collaborating with each other, planning their examinations, what we call formative assessments, so that they can evaluate how the students receive the instruction that the teachers gave them, so that we can go back and make sure that those students master those Tennessee standards.
Okay. Great. All right, good luck to all of our students out there who are taking some assessments this week and into next week. Okay, it's also National School Volunteer Week. And later on this week, we will be celebrating our school volunteers with the annual Shining Apple Volunteer Recognition event. This is the 26th, I believe, year that we have done this. I have done 25 of them.
It's one of my favorite events that we have, and I talk about some of my favorites. The military recognition is one of my favorites. Shining Apple is one of my favorites, and there's just that handful that just are a real emotional build when you spend time with that. You know, it's National School Volunteer Month, and we schedule Shining Apples for that reason.
Yes, we do.
Last week we actually had a meet and greet with our PTO presidents, both outgoing and incoming. Happened to be on a rainy day where we had everybody in, and we had booths from all our departments to have conversations with our presidents. One of the items that I've heard from many of our presidents is the desire to broaden the scope of parent volunteer work through the PTOs. I know that just in the past years there have been folks who've been scared,
yes,
you know, because of COVID.
Right, or they may be new to the district. They haven't been able to get involved. We want them involved. Our PTOs want you to be involved.
One of the great aspects of WCS is that parent involvement. Yes. High parent expectations and parent involvement in supporting the work that we do. We celebrate that at Shining Apple. The award itself is a neat award. It's a glass apple. I think it's a great thing to put on your desk. Even if you're Zooming with somebody you have it in the background, people will ask those volunteers, what is that? Where'd you get that? And it's a great story to tell about supporting students in their work.
That is going to be so much fun. But I want to go back to the PTO meeting that we had. It was a come and go. You said it was a rainy day, so we didn't quite have the wonderful turnout that we wanted, but there were so many people there, and it was so fun to get to talk to everybody because we've been meeting virtually. We usually meet with our PTO presidents at least once a semester, if not 3 times a year. And we've done those virtually since the pandemic. Next year, we're coming back in person.
Well, there's still a myth out there that we haven't had volunteers in our buildings. And that was true a year ago. It hasn't been true this year. We've been on campus all year this year. I think maybe we had 1 or 2 programs early in the fall where teachers or students were out because of actually having COVID. But it's been months and months, and we've been open for volunteers. So we want to continue to dispel that myth that volunteers aren't in our buildings. You know, even a lot of our board members have been volunteering in the cafeteria. The stories they tell are uplifting. Just the interaction with students, getting to know students. Every time you're in a building doing a service for students, it will build you up and do more for you than the service you're providing. That's
right. That's right. So we still would love to have you in our cafeterias serving students, reading to students, you know, so many times making copies to support our teachers even, cutting out things for teachers, for students to be able to use. So many different opportunities, and we have a tiered volunteer system. At the highest tier, if you're going on a field trip or that sort of thing, you do need that background check, but there are many different ways for you to be involved if you don't have the resources to make that happen.
Well, for parents, I want them to know that we do have safety procedures in place for that volunteer work, and you mentioned that. We have a tiered system so that if there's a possibility that a volunteer might be one-on-one with a student, field trips are a great example. We actually fingerprint our volunteers to make sure that we've done a criminal background check on them. Safety has to be our number one all the time.
That's right. That's right. So get involved. It's not too late for the school year. 5.5 weeks left, and then get ready because we work all summer long.
I will tell you, we started with testing. We make sure we don't even have lawnmowers going during testing. So just the next week or so, we're going to be very careful to create that positive environment for students as they test.
That's good. That's good. All right. Lot of I don't know, a lot of activity last night at the board meeting. Let's start with Discovery Virtual. And the board did vote to go ahead and close Discovery Virtual. That is our K-8 online school. For folks who do not know the history of how that school came to be, explain that process and then explain the need to close.
It's easy to forget hard times after you've been through them, but think back, a little over 2 years ago, the governor said all schools ought to close, and the entire school system across the state closed. It wasn't just in Tennessee, we know all those stories. As a result of that, we started working on virtual education. Just in that first window, that spring when everything shut down. That next school year, we offered a virtual program so that any family could choose for their child to be 100% virtual and still be enrolled at their school. We had 4 figures, over 1,000 students across the district participate in that program. During that year, the previous school year, the state restructured their regulations, establishing that if a student was to go full-time virtually, we needed to have a school in place. So we actually created 2 schools, a high school, which we had been working on with some courses here and there over the previous years, and a K-8. There was enough demand for a K-8 for this school year. We had 343 students in that K-8 at the beginning of this school year. We opened up registration for next year. That number dropped by about 75%. K-8, 9 grade levels, kindergarten plus grades 1 through 8, we had 86 commitments to be in those 9 grades total. There were just not enough students interested for us to provide the services that we expect of ourselves. There are online programs in the state. There's actually a public online high school that's been in place for 10 plus years. When we recognized that our community had sufficient demand, we wanted to do it ourselves, and it's been good. It's a high quality instructional process. But our community has spoken. When the numbers drop in 1 year that much, and we're so small that we even struggle getting enough appropriate teacher licensures to teach, our community told us there's just not enough interest. I am bothered by those small numbers who really wanted to stay, but with so many peers they couldn't. So a few weeks ago, when we got our numbers for re-enrollment and enrollment, we had to let our community know, I'm going to have to recommend to close that school because we can't provide the WCS service that we expect of ourselves with that. So we gave everyone the opportunity to start looking elsewhere. Our hope is that they come back to our buildings, but we recognize that every family's different. There are some public opportunities out there. So ultimately, our board discussed it, recognized that the numbers are just not viable in our community, and we know we need to do best by our families, and the best thing was to close the school.
All right, so Discovery K-8 is closing. We are keeping the high school. There was more interest at the high school level. We are able to keep that open, and plus, we also will be offering online classes for students who are at the traditional high school as an extra perhaps, or whatever, as we have been doing for the past several years pre-pandemic.
So high school student numbers are higher. And I really think that's appropriate because as students advance and grow, their capacity to do online grows with them for a lot of students. So we had a larger total number of high school students who want to be fully online. On top of that, we had over 4,000 seats for particular classes selected by students who spend most of their day on campus. So there was plenty of interest at the high school level. Now, a key point, if you think about high school licensures, that whole myriad of coursework that students take requires a teacher with a specific license, the specific professionalism to teach a specific course. High school courses generally are taught asynchronously, where students are given the assignments, they're self-driven, they touch base with their teacher, they interact through the internet rather than have a particular 45 minutes to an hour scheduled of traditional class. When we did the K-8, We experimented at the middle school level with asynchronous a couple of years ago. It wasn't good.
Yeah.
And so we made sure that we did synchronous work at the middle school and elementary school level, but the model is different in the high school because students have advanced through those younger grades and are ready for that.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to, we had a charter school up for consideration by the board. Talk about when a charter school applies to operate in a school district, what that process looks like. It's hours and hours of work, review, interviews, that sort of thing that take place before a committee makes a recommendation to the board.
The state standards for approval of charter schools has changed and evolved over the years. Years ago, I participated in a review of a charter school, and it was a much more simplified process
Wasn't quite as in depth as it is now.
compared to what it is now. Now the state has a very specific, very detailed rubric with 3 main sections related to finance, operations, and instruction. And within those 3 main areas, there are a number of subsets that get evaluated. Very specific evaluation. The rubric is basically a structure where particular elements that are necessary for a school to succeed are evaluated by a committee. And the committee reviews all that detail. They operate both independently and together and ultimately come up with a conclusion based upon the application of that particular charter school. And the state has been very objective and detailed in their expectations for that review. So we had an application. We actually had 2 applications for this year. One application withdrew after the committee formed, but the application that continued went through that committee process. That committee came up with its conclusions, and through a very structured scheduling process through the state law, our board voted last night on that recommendation. The recommendation from the committee was that it not be approved. We have about 200 plus pages of detail related to that that's in our board packet. You can go to our website, click on school boards, and find the April work session with all that detail.
Right, and Dr. Lee Webb, who actually led the review process from the staff level, did a presentation at the April work session, so you could go back and look.
That's great. We have there's a PowerPoint that gave the board some supplemented information or synopsized information on that detailed analysis from the committee. Ultimately, the board voted last night to deny that. That entity has the opportunity to go through some more appeal processes related to that. And so my recommendation to the board was, given the state law, given that structure, honor the committee's recommendation. The board had time to review the detail of that committee recommendation, and that's the decision they made.
Okay, very good. So let's talk about the EPIC app, which has garnered quite a bit of attention. I can't even keep track of time. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. There was a concern about access, and we, at the district level, pulled the app off of the dashboards for students while we could review that concern, and then we have since put the app back on. So that's that in a nutshell, but there's so much more to it. So talk about that process that we go through when, there's several processes, right? Because you've got your apps, which are very different than like a library process. So just try to break it down for everybody.
Well, thank you for that. Content that a child has access to and receives is very important. For curriculum, we have a very well-defined process. The state establishes curriculum standards, the point at which we make selections for our core classes and even those extra classes. And we go through usually a 6-year window. We select ELA work, curriculum.
Right.
We select math curriculum, science.
Yeah.
On down the line, we have that 6-year review process. That includes public review, teacher recommendations. The board votes on that even after the state has given us choices based on their evaluation of the Tennessee standards. Within the curriculum, we allow parents to opt out of particular lessons if there's something within that they don't want. We don't recommend it, but there are times when a parent says, you know what, I don't want blank for my child. couple of generations ago, it might have been related to science and the parents saying, I don't want my child to participate in dissection.
Okay.
And we'll occasionally get those requests. That's just one example.
Okay.
Likewise, they might say, I have a religious belief about a particular piece of the curriculum, and I want my child removed from that when it's taught. We honor that. We have a process, we have a board policy that commits to honoring that parent request. Likewise, in our libraries, we have a lot of selections where students have that opportunity to inquire independently and pull a library book off the shelf and read that library book. Occasionally a parent does not want their child to check out a particular library book. And it happens at the elementary level, it occasionally happens at the older grades. And we have a process to honor that the parent can have that conversation with a librarian about it. So we've got curriculum and we have library books that are vetted by our professional librarians. And we have a process to honor parent access. We have supplements. Largely these days, those supplements are online. We have hundreds of apps. Many of them are specific to a particular work that a particular student is doing, but some of them are used more broadly. And there are many of them. One that has come up recently in our community is EPIC. It's an online children's library. They advertise as having 40,000 plus selections.
Right.
It's a good resource. It has a lot of good children's books in it. We've had it for about 2 years. We really started it right about the time COVID hit because there was limited access to libraries and students could just jump on the electronic library. We actually have a free subscription which closes at 3 p.m. but parents have the opportunity to purchase and subscribe to this particular app. That's the way their business is run. So we've been offering that. A few weeks ago, we had a concern expressed from a parent, actually a handful of parents, who said, I don't want my child to access a particular book. These are supplemented materials. We reviewed the app and could not find in our first review a mechanism to remove a particular book for a particular child like our librarians do with a hard copy library. Because of that, because it was supplemented, we stepped back, we removed it from access so that we could evaluate how we could honor that parent request just as we do with curriculum, just as we do with library books. We did that review. We concluded that the best we could do with this particular app and its structure was allow a parent to opt out. In other words, we could remove the icon from the student's dashboard
If the parent doesn't want that.
if the parent doesn't want. So we spent a couple of days reviewing, seeing what we could do. When we determined what we could do, we reopened the app after giving parents that opportunity to opt out. We're going to continue to honor parents' requests as much as we possibly can when it comes to their child's access to curriculum. Ultimately, we've decided and recognized it's a good app. It has a lot of good content. Our teachers use it. And so the appropriate thing to do was to return access so that our teachers could use it, knowing that some parents might want to opt out.
So I just want to quickly talk about apps in general because we do have hundreds of them. But before they're ever put on a dashboard or before they're ever allowed to be used, they have to go through. Our instructional technology group vets every app that is used. And that process will now begin again because there is a new state law that we must follow that is quite, well, I don't know what to say about it. It's large.
Well, number one, there are a lot of laws to protect student access to content. And there are children's internet protection processes that the federal government puts in place. And we have filters to honor those federal requirements. There's a new state law that's actually going to be applicable this July that requires library information, library books, and other items
everything
to be included on each school's website with a list. So the way this law reads is library books have to be listed on each school's website. But in addition to library books, there's a laundry list of additional items. Periodicals, apps, etc., other materials,
microfilm,
basically anything.
CDs.
Just about any other content other than the curriculum. And we spoke earlier about curriculum versus library books, the state curriculum approval process versus our librarians. plus the supplemental materials. So we know that with content apps where students have access to content, the way this new law reads is we're going to have a list of those items. So right now our staff is going through the process of evaluating our apps and determining which apps give content that we'll need to list versus which apps have a process or other function that will not need to be listed based on that new law.
I just have to say I can't wait to get further guidance on that as that falls under the communications department. And as we oversee, next year it will be 50 school websites and the district website. So there's some angst in my department. I gotta tell you.
I will tell you, Carol, that this basic idea is consistent with what I think is a good thing, informing parents of what their children are studying in school, what their children are reading. So I want to encourage parents, have conversations with your children about what they're reading at school and even outside of school. Officially, technically speaking, that's outside that's outside of school day, but have those conversations with your children. Educate yourselves on that. Have conversations with principals and your teachers
and
about the
build a relationship with your child's teacher, because really that's where it starts, in the classroom. Know what they're being taught. Work on those communications and relationship building.
We work very hard on that. We work very hard on giving good content that helps drive those students. And I mentioned standards at the beginning of this conversation. We prepare students well for their next steps. And the more a parent participates, the better for their child.
That's right. We are going to end this conversation on out-of-county tuition for teachers and staff who live out of Williamson County but want to bring their children to Williamson County schools. And the board took action last night to make that easier.
For decades, we have had the requirement that anyone out of county must pay tuition. We don't open our school system to someone living out of county. The Tennessee structure is that each county serves those people who live there. However, with teachers and staff who work here, there's a lot of good things about having their child here. They might not have to run and grab an extracurricular activity event to pick their child up for those kinds of things. So we do make our schools available to our full-time teachers and our full-time staff. There has been a requirement and still is a requirement for tuition. I don't know the detail of it because I've been here 17 years and it predates me. I believe a big reason for that was because of the existing funding structure in Tennessee, where certain counties end up needing to support schools more than others. And Williamson County is one of those. About 2/3 of our total funding comes from our county revenue, largely property tax and sales tax are the two big ones from our county. So there's been a requirement for teacher tuition. And our board votes annually on the tuition rate. Years ago, it was the total per pupil expenditure. About 12 years ago or so, it was dropped to focus really on the property tax value per student. But there's been a discussion over the last month or so about recruiting, about finding ways to increase our competitiveness. So ultimately, last night, our board made another adjustment to the tuition rate, cut it in close to half, with a reverse multiplier, a divisor, based on how long a teacher or staff member has been with WCS. So the new standard after last year, the tuition being $3,850, to drop it to $2,000 with a 20% reduction for the next 5 years based on how long a teacher has been with us. So
which would get it down to zero.
That's correct.
Okay.
So $2,000, if you're in your first year, you can bring your children to WCS schools, even if you live out of county. Next year it's $1,600, drop it by 20%. Next year $1,200, and then after 5 years it's at zero. So we've modified that. My hope is that it does help in recruiting for those families who might not be able to move in because of the very fast increase in property tax. We do need to continue to think about continuing to be competitive, especially with pay issues. And this serve every single person because not everyone has a child, but we hope that it helps.
And when they bring their children into the district, they can go to a school that is in their work zone.
That's right.
Okay.
We use the phrase feeder pattern. Our hope is that from a convenience standpoint, a teacher or a staff member can have their child near them, because you do have to pick up your child sometimes, right? Children who live out of county can't ride the bus to home, and so having that flexibility for teachers is a good thing.
Okay, so we're over 30 minutes, but I have to bring up one more thing. We thought we were going to have to do a lottery because we open zoned our schools. We do not have to do a lottery.
Another state
close.
law change that actually affected us this year was expanding the open zone choices. For years we've had open zoning, and a few years ago actually the state changed the law, and I could see that they paralleled our language. A new law came in that actually expanded that more broadly and changed our standard. Our standard used to be first come, first serve, but the new law requires you to gather up the numbers, and if you're over your capacity, you have to have a lottery. So we did that this year, and we had one school come within 3 of needing a lottery. I anticipate it's going to happen at some point. The good thing is this year we didn't quite reach that maximum of available seats. So this year there's no lottery.
So those, in a nutshell, those people then who have applied to go out of zone, we'll be following up with them, and they will be able to do providing their own transportation.
Thank you for that. Starting today, our planning department, our zoning department is communicating with those families to confirm that their application is something that they want for next year. The difference for us was, in years past, families knew just almost immediately, okay, I asked for this out of zone, there's room for me, I can go. They knew as early as January. We're in April, and now we're moving fast to let families know that that's still available, because we had to comply with the state law to wait till the deadline to let folks know.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. We would have let you know early, but
That's right.
We can't. Okay. Anyway, all right, well, that's our time. Good conversation, good information. Thank you as always. And thank you for joining us for the Superintendent's Report.